Before I get into topic tonight, any questions about your meditation practice, experience, or these instructions? What we're being asked to do clear, and is your relationship to what's happening in your meditation? Any clarifications or questions about how to work with experience? All right, well, last time I was here, was that last week or was it 2 weeks ago? Last week? 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
I was gone on retreat last week?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm here now. Back.
Here then?
I thought I was. We're going through the story of Siddhartha coming to awakening, becoming the Buddha, this very human being who was seeking freedom, was seeking ease. And quick recap, he was born a prince, had everything, surrounded by abundance, pleasure, felt that something was missing. Went on a spiritual search for freedom, for happiness, for ease, for peace. Studied with all of the masters that he could find, spiritual teachers, meditation teachers. Found that predominantly they taught him concentration-based meditation practices that he quickly mastered, as the story goes. He learned how to concentrate his mind quite quickly, which led to all of these really blissful meditation experiences. But he found it unsatisfactory because he said, I can get super high when I'm meditating, blissed out. But then when I'm not meditating, the craving, the aversion, the self-centeredness returns. The causes of suffering return when I'm not in these temporary meditative bliss states. And I'm not looking for a temporary, I'm looking for something that I can live. And then he went off and did the ascetic practices, tortured his body, extreme renunciation, not a lot of bliss in that. But took it all the way, did years of this sort of naked, ascetic, homeless, living in the forest, fasting, seeing if he could break his attachment to pleasure, his aversion to pain, his self-centeredness. So that didn't work either. I had the luxury, I had the meditative concentration, I had the renunciation. So I kept going down dead ends. The worldliness did not provide happiness. And then a lot of these spiritual teachings also did not provide the kind of happiness that I'm seeking. He said they're sort of dead ends. Temporary freedom, but not full freedom. And then we went through the story about how he discovered mindfulness, and mindfulness is something that the Buddha discovered, created, however we want to talk about it. It was never taught in history by anybody before him in any kind of recorded history. Now, I think it was his own, my sense is he, trial and error. He's like, this doesn't work. Concentrating and ignoring doesn't work. Extreme renunciation doesn't work. What if I try to sit with present time, non-judgmental awareness? What if I try to investigate my experience rather than ignore it, avoid it, suppress it? And he came up with mindfulness. He says, and this works. This led to the end of suffering. This led to the place where I could meet all of the unpleasant experience with compassion, all of the pleasant experience with non-attachment. And I saw through the way that the mind, the ego, creates a self, takes everything personal. I, me, mine. He says, It was mindfulness that unlocked this. But not mindfulness alone, also the concentration that he had learned really helped. Being able to focus the mind really helped in the mindful investigation, analysis of what's happening moment to moment. We talked about the battle with Mara, that even on the verge of enlightenment, his own mind attacking him with lust, thinking about sex, thinking about well, maybe I'd just be happy if I was getting laid. With anger, with resentments, and I think that this is so important. Like, we have the statues of the Buddha and we think man, that guy was perfect. And by his own admission, he says, I was on the verge of enlightenment and I was just thinking about porn. I was on the verge of enlightenment and I was just thinking of resentment and hatred. I was on the verge of enlightenment, and the last thing that entered my mind before awakening was unworthiness. The last thing, the last attack of Mara was, who do you think you are? Why do you think you're worthy of freedom? And that, we can all relate to that feeling of how brutal it is to have a human mind that criticizes and judges and doesn't know our own worth and craves for pleasure and hates pain. He said it was this spiritual awakening was as simple as, I don't take it personal anymore. I know that this is not who I am. I've seen through the suffering that this human experience creates for us. And that unexamined life is at times unbearable. Or almost unbearable. Certainly stressful. My favorite teaching comes right after his awakening, when he's reflecting on what to do now. He says, I'm free, awake, free. What should I do? What do you do with freedom? What do you do? What do you do when you get there? You spend your whole life kind of trying to get somewhere, and then you get there. And okay, shit, I'm here. Now what? And some hesitance to teach. And that reflection, what I call our center, and this flag I've been waving for decades now. He says this path that goes against the stream, patiso tagami. Against greed, against hatred, against delusion of self-centeredness. He said, I got here, but people aren't going to want to hear this. People want the bliss. People want the abundance. Give them abundance teachings all day. They want that. Give them the, I'll teach you how to be uncomfortable. Not that interesting. I'll teach you how to be in pain and not suffer about it. I'll teach you how to not cling to pleasure. He said it's too counter to the human tendency towards greed, hatred, and delusion, clinging, aversion. So he was hesitant. He didn't think people would want to practice this sort of subtle, radical, counter-instinctual path. And then he got convinced himself, okay, it's worthy. There'll be some revolutionaries in every generation dissatisfied enough with the status quo to do something as radical as practice non-attachment, as practice compassion, as practice seeing through the self that the ego creates, that the mind makes. Being convinced, he says, okay, who am I going to teach? This is where we ended last time. Who should I start? Who should I experiment with? Who might understand this? And he thinks of his 5 ascetic friends, these guys that he had practiced years doing these extreme renunciation practices with. He says, if anybody's going to get this, these guys were serious about practice. Let me see if I can explain what I'm talking about to them. Starts to walk from where he came to his awakening, which is known as Bodh Gaya. And he knows, in his knowing, he knows that My homies are up by Varanasi, Saranath, the deer park outside of Varanasi, Benares. And I'll start walking, and I don't know how long it would take to walk. I think it's a several days walk. I've done it on the train before. It's like a 12-hour train ride. I think that's going to take you 3 or 4 days walking barefoot. And he starts walking. And before he gets there, I might have talked about this last time, but I think it's worth reflecting on again. He's still trying to figure out, how am I going to explain this? How did I get here? I wasn't really taking notes. I was seeking something, and I was trial and error, and then I got here. And how do I formulate this into something that I can now teach? I need a formula. And before he creates the Four Noble Truths, which is really the first teaching that he gives, where he says, here it is, 4 Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. But first he says there, in his own reflection, he said, well, what happened for me? He said, first, I just had this knowing. I trusted that it was possible for us human beings. I trusted, I had faith, I had confidence that there was an ability for humans, for people, to see the causes of suffering and to end the causes of suffering. I believed if I investigated deeply enough, I could find freedom. I trusted that meditation was going to be part of the practice, part of the process. I trusted that some renunciation was going to be necessary. So I think it's interesting for us each to reflect on when we got started, what got us started, what kind of trust, what kind of faith, what inspired you. Maybe there's that first book you read, but even that, like, what inspired you to pick up that book? Whether it was a Thich Nhat Hanh book or Siddhartha or Dalai Lama book or Jack Kornfield or whoever, maybe Dharma Punx, I don't know, like whatever book sort of, but there was something in you, some search that said, maybe I'll read this weird book about meditation. Maybe I'll check this out. There's some seeking in us, some trusting, some hope, maybe it is, that I hope this works. I hope this meditation works. Let's see what it's about. He said from that trust, he had put in the effort, did the work. I believed it was possible, so I went out and listened to people that said they knew the answers. I went and checked people out. So I went to this guru, and I went to that guru, and I went to that yoga place, and I went to that meditation center, and I listened. And I tried what they were teaching me. They said, concentrate your way to bliss. And I said, okay, let me do that. I'll concentrate my way to bliss. All right, bliss is interesting. It's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for freedom, not temporary pleasure. But he said, I listened and I did the work. I tried it. I didn't have all of this. In recovery, we talk about contempt prior to investigation. You ever have that sort of spiritual contempt prior to investigation? I'm guilty of that a lot. I talk a lot of shit about Judeo-Christian, Islamic, theistic religions, and I haven't really tried them. They might work pretty good. I don't know. I haven't really tried them very, I tried a little. I've dabbled in prayer, but I haven't really tried them. He said, I put in the effort, and the things that worked that I put effort into were learning to concentrate and learning to be mindful. So mindfulness and concentration were what allowed me to see clearly and to learn how to respond more wisely, more appropriately to the impermanent nature of things, to the unsatisfactory nature of things, and to the impersonal nature of our minds that are confused. The untrained mind, the untrained heart will lead us down dead end after dead end, into clinging, into aversion, into self-centered fear. He said, but the effort to train the mind, on Friday we did this, Soma and I did the Friday night class on training the monkey mind. He said the untrained mind is like this monkey that just swings from grasping to this branch and grasping to this thought and grasping to the future and to the past and to fear, and to the untrained mind just clings from one thing to the next. He said, but I believed it was possible, and I put the effort in, and I taught my mind to stop clinging. Taught my heart to stop clinging. I put in the effort through mindfulness and concentration. And when I stopped clinging, wisdom, panya, wisdom was the result. The freedom of non-contentiousness with life. No longer fighting impermanence. I had this liberation. Sounds good, right? It's what it's what we're all seeking. I want that. I want to stop fighting. I want to live in acceptance of the way things are. I want to see clearly. If we want that, put in the effort into mindfulness and concentration and some renunciation and get free. And so when he finally got to, he'd reflected on those, they're called the 5 faculties. And when he finally got to Benares and he came in contact with his 5 friends, first they shunned him. I don't know if you remember a couple weeks ago, because he was doing this, ascetic practice, this extreme renunciation, where there's pride in suffering, and whoever ate the least and did the most extreme practices was if you're really suffering, you're really spiritual. If you're really avoiding everything pleasant, you are really spiritual. And as soon as you start indulging in anything pleasant, like the first thing that Siddhartha did when he gave up the ascetic practices, where he started eating yogurt. And they were just like, you fucking sellout, yogurt eater. Who eats yogurt? That's such indulgence. Spiritual people don't eat yogurt. We renounce such pleasures. And he finds them, and at first they say, here comes the sellout. Here comes Siddhartha, the sellout. But they see, something, wait a minute, he's looking a little healthy. He's been eating some yogurt, but there's something about his, countenance. There's something about him that draws them. They're like, wait a minute, he, just like us, seeking, but it looks like he's found something. And he kind of comes up and he says, yeah, I found it. I found what we've been looking for. Gather around. Let me teach you. And 2 of them at first were like, okay, yeah, let's listen to him. And the other 3 were like, I don't know. Should we? Should we listen to him? Should we listen to the sellout? And finally they're like, yeah, let's check it out. Let's at least hear him out so we can criticize him. So they gather around and he says, I've found liberation. I found freedom. I'm no longer suffering. And this path that I've discovered, that I've directly experienced, that I'm living, is a path between 2 extremes. It's a middle path. And I said one extreme is people who search for their happiness in the world, in worldliness, in material goods, in money, in property, prestige, fame. He said the dead end of looking for happiness from an external worldly source never works. It's a dead end. So the other dead end is when we go too far into renunciation, like we've been doing. The dead end of an extreme avoidance. Or sometimes it's translated as a dead end of religion, of blind faith. He says, I found this middle path. This, I'll paraphrase and say, I believe that the way that I hear it is that I found a path of humanist psychology, of understanding the human condition, understanding how the human mind works, and learning to respond wisely, appropriately to this human condition. He said, the first thing that we have to know is there's this noble truth that suffering is normal. That everyone has the word dukkha, sometimes translated as suffering, of the unsatisfactory nature of things, the difficulties. And he defines it. He says, birth, you would just take birth. Birth is dukkha. Sickness, aging, death, just this human life cycle is difficult. You're born into a difficult situation, and then you're subject to aging and sickness and death. And while you're here, it's extra difficult because everything's impermanent, and everything that you care about and you love will be separated from. We will lose. We can't hold on to anything. It's all impermanent. Grief, lamentation, sorrow, part of existence. And again, this is not pessimism. This is normalizing. This isn't focusing on the negative. This is the Buddha just saying, like, look at your life. Look at reality of being human. It's difficult, right? Sometimes. We're met with all of these unpleasant experiences. You have a body, a nervous system, sensitive heart, emotions, impressionable mind, conditioning. It's difficult when you take birth. There's going to be suffering. There's going to be stress. There's going to be fear. There's going to be loss and grief. For everyone, not just us traumatized, recovering drug addicts. For everyone. For all living beings. It's going to be difficult. And when I started studying Buddhism, I was just like, great, finally, someone's telling the truth. Just resonated so much for me in my experience of like, oh, it's suffering? Yes, there is suffering. I am suffering. What do I do about it? Punk rock was a good outlet for my rage, but it didn't teach me how to deal with it. So he says this first noble truth. So, but the second noble truth is that there is a cause. The reason we are suffering, the reason we're not happy, not peaceful, not totally content, we're dissatisfied, is because we're born into this body that is ruled by a survival instinct that shows up as repetitive craving for pleasure. In a world of impermanence, we want pleasure. And no matter how much pleasure we get, we can't keep it because it's impermanent. We will be separated from it. It will end. And it's not like you have a craving once in a while. Repetitive survival instinct of, I want it to feel good all of the time, and it doesn't. I want that blissful, concentrated meditation to last, and it doesn't. Now we even suffer about our meditation experiences. No, right? Not only do we suffer about like losing relationships or, pleasure, but then also you start meditating. You're like, wow, I had this amazing meditation and I can't get back there no matter how hard I try. I'm fucking pissed. Now I'm suffering about craving for a spiritual experience. in the context of the philosophical debates around nihilism and eternalism, he says, not only do we suffer about our craving for pleasure, pleasant experiences, sense pleasures, spiritual pleasures. He says also we suffer about wanting to exist forever. This craving for an eternal existence in this world of impermanence. When it's good, I want it to last forever. I want to exist forever. Or when it's painful, I don't want to exist at all. I want non-existence. Suicidal thoughts. Part of what he's talking about there. I don't want to deal with this pain. I don't want to feel it. I want to go away. I want to stay away. I don't want to come back. Following me? Suffering's normal. The cause of suffering, repetitive craving. The one of the ways I love to talk about it is the cause of suffering is not your fault. It's not your fault that you are so dysfunctional that you crave all of the time. Because the human norm is dysfunctional craving all the time. Right? It's not personal. It's not that you're defective. It's not that you're dysfunctional. It's that you're human and we're born into a survival instinct that's out of whack with reality. Your survival instinct says pleasure, 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 but reality is there's some wonderful pleasure and there's a whole bunch of pain. And there's a whole bunch of pleasure and then there's a whole bunch of impermanence and loss and difficulties. And sustaining pleasure is a fantasy. Third noble truth. And here's the reality. Here's the cause of the difficulties. Third noble truth, the good news. He says, I've come to this experience. I'm speaking from direct experience. This isn't a theory. Through my own effort, I came to this place where I don't suffer anymore. No more suffering. There's still pain, but pain is now met with compassion. There's still pleasure. Pleasure is met with non-attached appreciation. There's still a sense of I, but I don't believe it. My mind still creates this I, me, mine, but I see through it. I see it as an impersonal creation of the mind. Nirvana. He says, I've extinguished the causes of suffering, which are greed and hatred and delusion. Primarily talking about the delusion of a permanent soul, permanent self. I've seen through it. Said, I'm free. He said, and there's this eightfold path that led to my freedom, and that all beings have the ability to get free. All beings are worthy of freedom, and all beings have the ability to get free. This simple eightfold path program to liberation. He said you can break it down into developing wisdom, ethics, and meditation. Understand reality that it is and understand the karmic responsibility that we have for our own happiness. Total personal responsibility, karma. Understanding that our happiness is going to be based on wise intentions. Attentions free from greed, free from hatred, free from delusion. That our freedom is going to come from how we speak, how we act, how we relate to money and work. And really practical stuff here. Not just like meditate your way to an altered state, but alter your speech, alter your actions, alter your relationship to money and livelihood and work, and mindfulness and concentration. Eightfold path. And it's not linear. Most of you all know this. It's a wheel, not steps. It's not do this, then do this, do this. It's an 8-spoked wheel. Mindfulness doesn't come until number 7, but for most of us, and certainly for me, mindfulness was the doorway. I started on number 7, spoke number 7. Through practicing mindfulness, I got a little bit of understanding of personal responsibility. I started to be more mindful of my speech, of my actions, of livelihood. I started to get more concentrated as I kept coming back to the present. 7 and 8. The 6th factor is effort. All of the Eightfold Path, all of the spiritual practices take effort. Just remember the Buddha said before, first I had faith, then I put in the effort. It takes work to go against the stream. The stream is strong. The force is strong. The dark side is strong. To rebel takes a lot of work. And all of his friends rejoiced. They all got it, you know. I love these archetypal stories of like one Dharma talk. And then they're just like, the lights go on. They're like, he's right. And and then they're all arahants. They're all enlightened beings. And maybe they were so close, right? Just on the verge. The Buddha earlier said, I'm going to teach this Dharma for those with little dust in their eyes. And who do I know who has the least dust in their eyes? These 5 guys. Let me go find my friends and teach them. And then he explained it to them and they said, yes, makes perfect sense. So what we're missing here is mindfulness, non-judgment, not avoidance, but turning towards with compassion. Pleasure is not the enemy. Clinging causes suffering. How do we learn to have pleasant experience without attaching to it? That's what the middle path means. Not worldliness, not overindulgence, but engagement with both the painful and the pleasurable, with a wise relationship. And the wheel of the Dharma was set in motion. This radical process of inner revolution was started. This is 2,600 years ago. And, for what it's worth, I don't think that the guy was trying to start a religion at all. Of course, Buddhism became a religion. And I think the guy was really pretty critical of religion. He's like, religion fucks everything up. They sell you lies. They want you to believe their shit so you'll give them money. And one of the reasons why Buddhism, the teachings weren't even written down for a while, he forbade it. He said, this needs to be an oral tradition. This needs to be taught from people that know what they're talking about, who've experienced some freedom. And don't put it in books. As soon as you put it in books, as soon as you started writing it down, it'll become corrupted. And so it wasn't written down for a couple hundred years and was chanted and memorized. And also next week, I'll talk about right now I'll talk about, after this, one of the next teachings that he gives, he comes into contact with some other people who also get it. And he says, go forth and teach the Dharma. And when you teach the Dharma, this path, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, translate it into the language, the idiom of the people that you're talking to. Do not use my words verbatim. Do not get weird and religious about teach the spirit of these liberating teachings in the language of the people that you meet. I think that's really important. He really didn't want this to become some sort of doctrine, but a humanist psychology based in non-attachment. based in compassion. Houston Smith, religious scholar, he said, I think that as soon as the Buddha died, while he was alive, he could still kind of be like correct people. He said, but I think as soon as he died, people started fucking it up and turning it into a religion. Started getting attached to this is what it means. This is what he meant. And now we have thousands of years of it becoming a religion. And so much of Buddhism is in direct contradiction to his original teachings, I believe. So much of the religion has gone astray. And I'm sure this is true in every religion. I'm sure this is true in Judaism and in Christianity and in Islam. And human beings will just, create a monument to things and get super uptight about it and create a hierarchical power structure and start to lose sight of this very empowering teaching, very personal. You can do this in this lifetime through your own effort. I'm going on this rant about critiquing Buddhism because I like to do that.
Rant on.
It's said that like only 10% of Buddhists meditate now. Even the monastics. The core of the dude's teaching is meditation. And now we have billions of Buddhists who have this faith-based religion that aren't applying the core transformational technique that Buddhism offers us. And we have this other mindfuck going on now where we have millions of Westerners meditating and they don't even know it's Buddhism. As mindfulness has been secularized and infiltrated psychology and medicine and we've ripped off the Buddha and brought mindfulness out of the context of the Eightfold Path. And we have all of these millions of people in the West meditating, using mindfulness techniques, at least some version, maybe watered down, maybe bastardized in some ways, but still getting people to bring some mindfulness. Which I think it's great. I think secular mindfulness is great. More meditation, the better. So I will pause there and ask for some discussion. Any questions, comments, reflections on your relationship to these four truths, the Eightfold Path, or anything else I've talked shit about tonight? Jay, please.
I have a question.
I've got one here and then we'll come. I got Jay and then I'll come. Yeah.
So the thing about meditation was sort of like human beings are like this. They're always doing things. They're being very human all day long and all life, all year long.
Uh-huh.
They're like craving and grabbing and doing the business of being human without really realizing it. And what the Buddha was sort of saying about meditation was stop doing all that for 10 minutes a day or half an hour a day. And just by doing that, sort of like spend half an hour not being human all day and you'll realize and you'll sort of transcend in that way. And that would be some sort of daily touchstone on enlightenment. That you had a moment to step outside of being human. And then you can kind of realize that we are just animalistic running around chasing the rain.
I think so. Yeah, part of it was like, learn to stop and turn towards your own mind and body and heart and and see actually what's going on in here. Rather, see what's driving you as you're running around all day. And as you see what's driving you, see what is causing you suffering. Turn towards it. And then integrate that information that you get. Oh, I'm attached, I'm aversive, I'm self-centered. Integrate that into your daily, because mindfulness, not just a sitting meditation practice, as you know. He says, integrate this present time, non-judgmental, non-attached kind awareness into every activity. Make it really portable. You'll get some real information when you sit still about how your mind works, about how your emotions are arising and passing. You'll get some insight. Now integrate that into all of your activities. You start to see really quickly non-attachment is the key. I get that. Now, how do I integrate that when I'm running around all day being human, which is like clinging, clinging, attaching. I want this. I want that. I want to keep this. I don't want that to change. Now, see, the solution is letting go. So then we try to integrate that more and more into an acceptance of impermanence in your daily world, whether it's on the meditation cushion or in the shop, at the office, wherever it is.
These are sort of like, these are habits, clinging and running around all day, doing stuff that's sort of habitual.
They are habitual, repetitive and habitual, reactive patterns. Stephen Batchelor, in one of his last books, said maybe the best way to think about freedom and nirvana is just non-reactivity. Not reacting to pain with aversion, not reacting to pleasure with clinging, not reacting to the mind with clinging to it as self, non-reactivity. And that the more we practice, the less reactive we become. And the more maybe responsive, rather than reacting with aversion, responding with compassion. I would take it further to say that actually compassion at some point becomes a natural response. You don't have to put so much effort. I know for myself, I had years and years, and still sometimes to this day, but not as much, where I just had to fake it. I didn't have compassion, but I knew that that's what I was trying to. So I did that repetitive faking the response of caring about my own pain or the pain of others, until eventually that became more intuitive, more natural. Another question back there.
Yeah, my kind of I relate to like mindfulness as well. After having listened to like a interview right now, I was thinking the question of the subconscious versus the conscious, and I'll explain it somewhat as to what comes across you like in your dream state for like a few hours. And then if you perhaps happen to have like 3-4 hours where you pretend sleep and your mind just wanders. And then come the next day, like reflect on both. And you wonder like, why is your mind going in these like different directions? And in my personal case, like both aspects are like more or less would be considered by unhealthy by 99% of the room, you know? So a little bit curious, like how a couple of those aspects could be corrected, through the work that you like spoke of earlier.
Yeah. You know that where we ended the meditation, where we were saying to ourselves, "May I be at ease," and then we're saying to others, "May you be at ease. May all beings be at ease." When I started meditating 30-something years ago. I would say 99% of my thoughts also were negative, suffering, creating thoughts. I was strung out. I was locked up.
Pleasure seeking. All that,
Pleasure seeking, yeah. I like to simplify it as eat, fuck, kill.
We're right now.
I recognized you.
Yeah.
And then after years of saying, "May I be at ease," and doing the forgiveness. I forgive you, even though I didn't mean it. And I care about you, even though I didn't mean it. Like these positive Buddhist intentions. Saying those things over and over started to create some habits in my mind that weren't just base, survival, negative tendencies. And then there started to be some friendliness, also staying sober, going to meetings, being of service, doing all of that stuff, creating positive habits, right? Not just the negative natural habits of the mind, but creating positive habits, renunciation around drugs and alcohol and violence and all of that stuff that I used to participate in. But the meditation trained my mind to start to think kind thoughts. And it took a long time, but it works.
Like, is meditation a process of like eliminating thought, or is meditation a process of trying to create like positive thought?
I would say, let's say sometimes both, and not eliminating thought. The kind of meditation I do.
Raise my hand, that was good.
That's cool. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Not eliminating thought, observing thought and creating positive thought.
Right.
Training the mind to see, there's all these negative habits of mind. I'd like to create some positive habits. I don't want to just live with the negative tendency. I used to say, I don't think everybody likes this analogy, but it's sort of a recovery of that, like our mind is a bad neighborhood and you shouldn't go there alone. You need your sponsor. You need some people to kind of check in your thoughts with, because I trust my thought. It gets me locked up. Right. So I need some other people to be like, yeah, don't do that. Don't trust that thought. So the more we meditate, the more it actually changes our inner environment. And it's training the mind. First, you see it clearly and say, there's all this suffering, all this fear, all of these bad advice that my mind's giving me. Start to not take it so personally, not to believe it so much. But then also wisdom starts to come from meditative training. The more you develop these loving kindness phrases, the more you start to think kind thoughts towards yourself and others. The more you develop forgiveness as a practice, the more you start to naturally have a feeling of forgiveness for yourself and others, and compassion, internal and external. And these are skills that we develop. Neuroscience would say, your neurons that fire together, wire together. So when you say, I forgive you, even if you don't mean it, when you say, I care about you, even if you don't mean it, just saying those thoughts in your mind create mind habits of caring and forgiving. They wire together and you create neural pathways of kindness and compassion and generosity. And, like the Buddha said, something like, before you even learn to meditate, learn to give. Generosity, key. To break our fear-based, self-centered tendencies, learn to be of service, learn to give, learn to share your resources. Because that will develop an inner habit of generosity, which will break the self-centered fear mentality that we're born with for the most part.
See, that's why I appreciate the service that you're providing, because you put so some of us may have like some PTSD from our lives that we live.
Sure.
But you gotta find a balance with some like positive information that you're giving.
Yeah.
To like help create the battle and like swing one way or the other. And like I think that's I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's also why we don't charge. So that everybody can come. So that there's not a barrier of like you can only be here if you can afford it. Everyone's welcome to be here. And I'm always talking about the importance of generosity to support the center, to support me as a teacher, but so that there is no barrier of like, this is only for people who are desperate enough and to pay for it and can afford it to pay for it. This is, the Dharma's for everyone. And access should be there for everyone. And it should be supported, as it has been for thousands of years, by the generosity of the people that come and it resonates with them and say, of course, I want this to exist. I want to support these kind of places, these kind of teachers and teachings to exist so that there is no barrier for access. Please.
I don't want to hopefully see the semantics, but I just it just like clicked with me. So I'm going to just confirm with all the meditation techniques. One, Buddha was the first one to do mindfulness. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And is there, I've heard of contemplation and meditation,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they're two different things, but sometimes they get intermingled. Just kind of curious, do you know?
What does contemplation mean to you? How do you reflecting
I
on?
see it as reflecting, observing, analyzing, and then I think meditation sometimes we can see it as elimination of thought.
I am not scholarly enough to know where contemplative analytical meditation techniques date back to. But I would imagine even just in the Indian kind of tradition that some of the early Upanishadic concentration meditations were also a bit analytical and contemplative. I think that contemplative practices are pretty universal and probably predate Buddhist mindfulness. But you don't find anywhere else this sort of open, inclusive, non-judgmental, observative, mindful, what we call mindfulness. You don't find that in any other traditions before. After the Buddha, you do. You find it even in Hinduism, where they kind of co-opted it, and we're like, oh yeah, what the Buddha said, that's part of us too. Or maybe even some of the later Christian meditations, which, Christianity doesn't come until 500-600 years after the Buddha. But some of the mindfulness of Indian Buddhist thought did creep into other schools, for sure. There's the whole theory of Jesus going off and studying Buddhism in Afghanistan. Yeah, you like that one, huh? It's possible. He did go on a walkabout for a while, so he could have learned some mindfulness.
That's what I don't know. I just looked at the mindfulness because there's so many, like you said, there's so many
techniques.
Things happen. So mindfulness is.
That's that's one of the only. There's a handful of things that are original to the Buddha. The teachings on dependent origination, something that he created. Mindfulness he created. This view that you could come to awakening in this lifetime based in your own actions without any sort of divine intervention. This non-theistic, through your actions you can wake up, is a radical view that is original to the Buddha. So.
The radical view is that you could train your mind like while your eyes are closed and then benefit, and then while your eyes are open you live your life, that you can benefit from what you experienced previously.
Yep, for sure. And continue to train your mind with your eyes open.
I would love to be able to do that.
Yeah, you can. Welcome. That's what we're doing. And don't get too excited because it takes it's possible. It's not quick, but it works slowly, gradually, the shifts that happen.
No, the theoretical possibility is
yes.
Awesome.
That's the big one, yeah. Okay, I see two hands, last two, yeah. Talk this. Yeah.
So, the concept of dust in your eyes, is that attached to negative karma? Or are they kind of two separate?
I guess. Karmic, yes, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I guess that's how we would think about it, yeah. How much you've sort of purified, woken up, whatever.
Or conditioning.
So, some of it karma, I guess, but also sometimes I feel like the dust, the obscuration can be, have you suffered enough to be dissatisfied enough to start to see clearly? So that doesn't, and sometimes all of that suffering that brought us here isn't like we had a really bad karma. It was like actually lots of negative karma that created the suffering to be willing to wake up. So I don't want to say, you had, good karma enough to see clearly. because sometimes that's the case, but sometimes I think like, no, it's those of us that have the, Anguli Mala had little dust in his eyes as this character who's a serial killer. Like, so it's not always like, oh, really karmically wholesome. And then we got the Dharma. It's like, no, like karmically fucked. And we're desperate enough to get the Dharma.
They're almost done.
Yeah. But still there's a karmic connection there. And then we can get into past lives and then we all get lost. Please, Judy.
So my question to you is, so through my many years of doing my meditation practice, I've noticed that it's changed, and really, I guess recently I've kind of looked at it like, why is it changing? And I think I've come to, maybe because I want you to say, it's okay. But what I'm sometimes I struggle to sit and meditate, but I feel like if I'm not sitting, then I am being observant, and I feel that I am in the moment. And I am doing a meditative practice. It's just kind of, instead of doing a walking practice, I could be driving and doing my practice, noticing the trees. And I also have these chimes. I don't know, every time it hits, I go over a bump and it goes, ding. And then I'm like, hey, where am I? So it kind of always brings me back to that. But I noticed that how my meditation practice had changed. At the very beginning, all I wanted to do was sit.
Right.
Sit. And I thought, oh, now I'm getting too attached because it really felt good sitting. When I had a problem, I ran home to sit. When I was happy, I ran home to sit, to just be with it and enjoy it. And I just noticed that things it evolves and it changes. And is that normal?
Yes. It's okay. You just have to be honest with ourselves when we're looking at the results that we're getting. And, are we getting better results when we're sitting more than when we're not sitting as much? And, we know each other for a long time, and I'm glad to see you sitting on the ground.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
And I know how much, those teachings resonated with you about the importance of learning to be uncomfortable. And I feel like that's one of the core benefits of doing more and more sitting meditation. Learn how to be uncomfortable, learn how to be in pain, learn how to be hungry, learn how to be lonely, and learn how to be, what was the third one? Yeah, I always forget. That one's too boring. I forget. Right, learn those things.
Yeah.
So you just have to be honest with your own sort of, am I turning towards my boredom, or am I keeping myself so active that I'm avoiding my boredom? Am I turning towards my discomfort, or am I keeping myself so active that I'm sort of staying in front of discomfort rather than learning how to be with it? So it is okay that it evolves, and sitting's important. And going on retreat and being in silence is the most transformative, regular thing that I've done with my life. And I continue to do it. And I think it's important for all of us to continue to do it, even when life's not that bad. Keep doing it.
Because it only gets better.
Yeah.
Is there such thing as like physically active meditation?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, everything that we can do can become mindful. But yoga, and we have walking meditation that we do, and lots of physically active mindfulness practices. The Buddha says make everything part of your mindfulness, every activity. Can't really do it without a sitting practice, I don't think. But once you have a sitting practice, then you can integrate it into everything. Yeah. Okay, we're out of time. Generosity is an important part of our spiritual life. Please be generous. There's a bowl on the front desk. We encourage a $15 to $20 donation for the drop-in class. If you can afford that, please do it. If you can't afford it, give what feels right to you. If you're inspired to give more, please do give more. We are not meeting our overhead. We have a We actually haven't really done the math, but I'm kind of paying the rent still. The donations are not covering the rent. It would be nice if your donations would cover the rent and then also pay the center manager and give me some money at some point. That would be nice. I believe that we will get there, and we'll get there through your generosity. So please give generously. Some people do become monthly supporters where you say, I want to give $25, $50, $100 a month, whether I'm coming every week or not, just to support the center to exist. So consider becoming a monthly supporter. That's on the website. What other announcements do I have? I have a weekend retreat in February in Washington, which is running a little short. It's the Valentine's Day weekend. I think we have 10 people registered and we need 15 in order to run the course. And so we need, a few more people in order to make sure that happens. And I think that the manager said if we didn't get a couple more people by tomorrow or the next day, we're going to cancel the February retreat. So if you were thinking about coming to Washington for that 3-day Valentine's love fest in silence with your boredom and loneliness, register right away. And then I have a day long in March and a new 4-month program starting in March. That info is all on our website. If you're not getting the emails and you want to, sign up for the mailing list. I'll be here next week. I'm around for the next couple months, I believe. Thank you for your practice. May any goodness that comes from our practice be shared outward in all directions. May each one of us come to the awakening and the healing that we seek, and together may we create a positive change on this planet. See you next time.